Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so continuing on with our discussions on Venom, this is actually kind of cool. And here's the reason why Venom is cool when it comes to War of the Realms. Because when it comes to this whole thing, you have the Venom symbiote, and then you have Eddie Brock. And historically, they've always been one and the same, right? It's only really been in like recent years, within the last 10 years or so, maybe a little bit longer, that you've seen like some development with the symbiote itself, right? Like before it was just a thing that's there and Eddie Brock was a bad guy. Here's the deal, guys. Like, I was never the biggest fan of Venom. And I don't know if it's Donny Cates' writing or what. I mean, this is written by Cullen Bunn, but I don't know if it's Donny Cates' writing or whatever the case is, but like Venom is awesome now. And maybe it was just, he was always underrated by me. And I just never gave him, never gave him enough credit. But I feel like Venom has gotten a lot more interesting and a lot better in the last couple of years. Let me know what you guys think. I'm kind of curious what you guys think about the Venom, like the whole Venom concept, the stories and all that kind of good stuff. But in really this kind of picks up with 13 and it runs up to 15. So really this almost seems to pick up like as soon as 12 ended, we immediately went into War of Realms. Again, with the nature of comics, we don't really get an indication of how much time passes from one event to the next. It's just a series of sequential events. But for the most part, we can likely assume that like maybe a couple days at most have passed here. But regardless of the circumstance, I would say it's almost immediate. And the reason why was because if in the story arc before this, Eddie basically learned that he had a son named Dylan, right? Like it was literally his biological son that Eddie's father had been raising as his own. And so Dylan doesn't know that Eddie's his actual father. The result is that when Eddie essentially took him away from what was an abusive situation, or at least an abusive dad, this turned into Eddie kind of taking the son for his own and then trying to find something to do with him, which immediately goes into War of Realms. So again, it seems to happen almost immediately. There's no real time that passes here. And this is one of the things that I think a lot of people who are fans of Eddie Brock will really get their due, because Eddie's always kind of been a guy where it's like, okay, he's pretty awesome in and of himself, but like it was always kind of a mixed bag, right? I mean, the guy's capable, he can do a lot of things, but at the same time, it was always sort of this indicator that like Eddie seems kind of helpless without his symbiote, and that's changed over the years, right? And in this moment, when the forces of Malekith show up and there's some innocents who are being threatened, Eddie steps out absent the symbiote and says, like, we're gonna fix this anyway. Like, I'm gonna face off against all these guys anyway and do the best that I can. And for the most part, he actually holds his own. Now, of course, again, Eddie's got a lot of experience here. I mean, he's not really coming to this with no real idea of what he's doing, but it's a moment for like people who are fans of Eddie to kind of look at this and say, yeah, man, like Eddie's not helpless. He can do stuff like by himself without the Venom symbiote, right? So it's kind of like Flash Thompson getting his own moment absent the Venom symbiote. Eddie's getting his as well. Now, of course, once they end up getting to the safe house of Rex Strickland, who of course at one point was a guy who had like all these arms and armament, almost kind of functioned according to like Nick Fury, right? Like where Nick Fury always had these underground bunkers and always had a safe space. But one of the War Witches shows up and greets Eddie Brock. Now, the War Witches have been very ambiguous up to this point, right? Like the only thing we really knew about them is that they were one of the sources of power that Malekith was using in his War of Realms, and even before that, like launching this major campaign, right? And that's one of the things to keep in mind. When it comes to Marvel Comics, one of the things to keep in mind, at least for the new guys anyway, is there are a lot of people out there who can use various forms of magic, right? I mean, we've seen that manifest in a variety of different ways. When we looked at Jeff Lemire's Thanos run, we had the Coven of Witches and the God Quarry, right? Like they get to tap into magic. You've got Agatha Harkness, who's a legitimate witch. You've got Doctor Strange, who borrows the powers of other people. You've got all kinds of individuals out there who can use all forms of magic, and that's just in like based on Earth. But when Eddie pulls a gun, literally like she melts it in his hand, and then in turn presents him with what's called the Dreamstone. Now, unlike a lot of things that we've seen over the course of the Asgardian mythos, right? Like things like the Casket of Ancient Winters, which basically unleashes like the near infinite cold of like Jotunheim, things like that. The Dreamstone is essentially a wholly new creation by Cullen Bunn. Now, the funny thing about this and the way this will end is that it kind of gives us a little bit of a teaser of like what to expect later on. But the Dreamstone comes with this witch who basically says, hey, look, I can give you what it is that you want. I can give you the kind of weapons you need in order to essentially win. And it's sort of funny because the way she presents it is that the Dreamstone bends to the whim of its user, right? Like bends to its will and gives the user whatever it wants. But in this instance, like she presents the stone to Eddie Brock, and then in turn, Eddie Brock accepts it. Now, the motivation behind accepting this, it really kind of comes in a couple different ways. The first is that it kind of appears that Eddie either takes it because he needs to feel powerful. That's one of the things that kind of came with the Venom symbiote, right? Like the Venom symbiote gave Eddie a power he didn't already have. I guess, it kind of gave him the ability to really challenge Spider-Man in his days of anger. Following that, the Venom symbiote was actually a means for redemption for Eddie Brock. It was a means for him to kind of atone and make up for the things that he'd done in the past that he considered to be bad, basically villainous acts. The other half of this is that it could be that Eddie just wants to be a good guy. He wants to do good deeds. And by virtue of wanting wanting to do good deeds, he takes this Dreamstone symbiote on. But the cool thing is that this basically imbues him with seemingly all the powers of the Venom symbiote, but it seems to be more powerful than normal. He basically like cuts off the arms of one of the War Witches. Now, one of the things to bear in mind here is that because this is a War Witch that does hail from the realm of Svartalheim, the realm of Malekith, then what this seems to indicate is that she's on par with Malekith. Not necessarily in terms of magic, but in terms of like strength, durability, things like that. Eddie kind of going out with this symbiote and basically attacking almost everything he finds. The caveat comes into play when he begins to lose himself. And that's one of the funny things, because he says, you know, that whenever he had the Venom symbiote, he always heard Venom's voice in his head, right? He always heard the symbiote's voice kind of resonating in his mind. In the early days, it was, we got to take out Spider-Man. In the more recent days, it's Eddie, we can do good things. But he doesn't hear any other voice in here other than his own. And what it's basically doing is it's feeding on his rage. And that's when he begins to sort of realize what's actually going on here, that essentially what's been taking place is that when he gets this Dreamstone symbiote and he bonds to it, that it feeds on his rage. And that in doing so, it manifests every ounce of anger he has in the physical form of his symbiote, meaning the angrier he is, the stronger he gets. Now, I don't know if that's absolute. That kind of seems to be the case, but like literally he's withstanding a full onslaught from like giants and like trolls and like the forces of Malekith and the forces of Cinder. He's become a one-man army. And it's kind of a cool little thing, because in response to this, with basically Venom turning against the War Witch, cutting off her arm in the process, she ends up turning to a foe, a guy by the name of Jack-O-Lantern. Now, there have been a multitude of people who have played the mantle of Jack-O-Lantern, and in fact, it's kind of funny, because of the way that Jack-O-Lantern functions, people sometimes confuse him with the Green Goblin. And I know for people who are really familiar with comics, it's kind of like, how though? It's like confusing Iron Man with Captain America. That's true, but you got to think about it from the perspective of like non-comic book readers. You got guys who are basically throwing these small little portable bombs at people, so it's very easy to kind of get those two things confused. But in the history of Marvel, really there have been like two major versions, or at least I would say two supremely popular versions of Jack-O-Lantern. The first was Jason Masondale, who was basically the original, and then like Stephen Levins. Now, Stephen Levins' brother eventually became Jack-O-Lantern. I mean, the character's got a lengthy history. He's not brand new, right? Like Machine Man was the first appearance of Jack-O-Lantern. It was like 18 or 19 back in like 1981 or something along those lines. Regardless of the scenario, the various iterations of these characters have kind of followed a common theme in the sense of like a Halloween-based theme. But Jack-O-Lantern is nothing to scoff at, right? Like he's not a villain to like poke fun at and make fun of. In some ways, he's pretty dangerous. Now, for Spider-Man, he's used to him. He's not much of a threat. For Eddie Brock, he's pretty easy to take out. But at the end of the day, Jack-O-Lantern can still be pretty dangerous. The issue is that this is a new version of Jack. Now, it depends on what they end up doing with him. For the most part, he has usually been treated as a throwaway villain. Really, ever since Stephen Levinson kind of went away, he's really just kind of been a villain who was there, and that was basically it. But it is kind of cool here, because what ends up happening is that, like, in response to the powers of Jack-O-Lantern, or I guess the abilities of Jack-O-Lantern, throwing these, you know, crazy bombs and so on and so forth, suddenly Eddie Brock ends up donning this sort of like rock-based suit. And so it's really, really cool, because the suit modifies itself more so than the Venom symbiote that we've seen do before on its own. We see this suit modify itself according to Eddie. Now remember, it's the Dreamstone that's basically doing it all. And that's why it's kind of a cool thing, because then you have this great big huge knockdown drag out fight between like Eddie and Jack-O-Lantern. Now, it's not the greatest fight in the history of the world. Jack-O-Lantern riding like this giant flaming beast and then like descending down on Eddie. That's pretty badass. That's pretty cool, if I'm being honest with you guys. But the fight ends relatively fast. But one of the things to bear in mind here is, again, Eddie's not truly himself, right? I mean, Jack-O-Lantern possessing all these things comes by way of the Dreamstone. Under normal circumstances, he would never be able to do these things. But because the War Witch gave him a Dreamstone in addition to Eddie having one, it amplifies and changes the abilities of Jack-O-Lantern. Now, if I'm a betting man, this is going to continue on, and we're going to see this version of Jack with these kind of powers later on. But at the moment, it's kind of a cool little skirmish. And if Jack-O-Lantern had ever been this cool in the history of Marvel Comics, I would have cared a lot more about him. But it's crazy little things, right? Because one of the things this seems to indicate is like the ability to basically reconstitute oneself, right? Because in this fight that happens, Eddie Brock actually cuts Jack in half, and then Jack-O-Lantern reforms himself and comes back. So it seems to be the indication that like you can basically sort of reconstitute yourself. Well, then in turn, this is thrown out the window when we end up finding out that was basically like a drone, like a fake version of Jack, and like the actual Jack finally shows up and ends up fighting against Eddie. But again, like the fight ends pretty quickly, and the reason why ends up turning out because of the fact that this is not really an experienced Jack-O-Lantern. This is a guy who just stumbled across his stuff, right? A guy who just kind of came across the stuff of one of the old Jack-O-Lanterns and then donned the uniform and then took off, right? So it's like if a random guy came across like the shield of Captain America and the costume, put it on and decided to go be Captain America, well, he'd probably get the hell beat out of him because he's not Captain America. He doesn't have the super soldier serum. And so he would just get absolutely crushed and then probably laughed at. Probably kind of made fun of and picked at and so on. But in the middle of all this, Eddie begins to kind of regain himself, right? And this is one of the important things things, because Eddie has to sort of make a choice. In the middle of this whole conflict, there's some innocents that are caught in the crossfire. And in addition to those innocents, there are some forces of Muspelheim, the forces of Cinder, who basically descend here with the intention of killing them. And so Eddie has to make the choice. Either he faces off against Jack-o'-lantern and tries to stop him, or he saves these innocents. And in this moment of redemption, Eddie goes after and saves the innocents. And this is kind of Cullen Bunn's way of saying, hey, look, yeah, Eddie's still a good guy. And that's one of the many complaints that a lot of people were really worried about when it came to Eddie, right? Like, I mean, I love the idea of Eddie getting the symbiote back. A lot of people wanted Flash Thompson to get it back, but I was like, no. I'm old school. Give it back to Eddie. Eddie's got to have it. And I don't think me and the Flash Thompson guys will ever see eye to eye when it comes to who should be the proper host of the Venom symbiote, which is fun because I love getting those debates with you guys, right? Because like those of you guys who have met me at conventions, we've had that conversation, like which Venom is the best Venom? Definitely Eddie Brock. You're crazy. It's definitely Flash Thompson. It's fun to go back and forth with those discussions. But one of the things that people were concerned about is that if Eddie got the Venom symbiote back, Eddie would go back to being a villain. That's not the case. Eddie is, if anything, an anti-hero, but I would say probably more like to being a straight up hero now, right? I mean, literally putting himself in harm's way and then going and saving innocents as opposed to going and stopping the villain. That's really something that a hero would do. It's something Spider-Man would do, Captain America, Thor. But again, like he's really kind of a tried and true hero. And that's the important thing, is because when he sits down and says, like, I remember why I'm doing all this, because I'm trying to make sure that Dylan is safe. I'm trying to get him out of harm's way. I'm trying to be a good guy. What he ends up doing is seemingly unlocking the full potential of the symbiote, of this Dreamstone, and using the entirety of the thing at his own disposal. And it is awesome because it's basically like Venom Becomes God. And it's one of the coolest things, right? Because it's basically like Eddie Brock essentially using this Dreamstone, which can grant him an unlimited amount of power seemingly, or just bend to his will. And then in turn, like donning this insane amount of armor and then facing off against like Jack-o'-lantern, who can essentially do the same thing, and then defeating him. But more so than that, what Eddie also does, and this is kind of a cool thing, what he also does is that when it comes to people, he kind of looks at him and says, these people remind me of where I was. Not so much in terms of their physical weakness, but in terms of they so easily succumb to fear. People succumb to fear so incredibly fast. And what they need here is they need courage. They need hope. They need the belief that they can do something themselves. And so what ends up happening is he uses the Dreamstone and bonds the symbiote to all these civilians, who in turn start facing off against the forces of Muspelheim and win. And so it's cool because he empowers people to fight for themselves, and then of course creates like this giant axe thing, and then like has this huge amount of lightning that like strikes Jack-o'-lantern and sends him crashing down. And of course he loses the Dreamstone, but like Venom summons like lightning. I'm almost inclined to title the video that, Venom Summons Lightning, just to see if people would watch it. But because people would be like, what? He can't do that. I have no idea if that would be the case or not. Regardless, with Jack-o'-lantern taken out, of course, we end up learning this guy's basically a coward. Now, of course, following this, things wrap up pretty quickly. The War Witch, who is watching the whole thing unfold in some giant cauldron, is like made fun of by her teammates. And then Eddie goes back to the bunker where he basically spends time with Dylan. Now, funny thing to kind of also remember here, Eddie starts to talk about having the Venom symbiote. And one of the things that he tells Dylan is that having the Venom symbiote and then losing it also loses the memories that come with the Venom symbiote, right? So all the memories he has of hosting that symbiote, of like carrying it around, of like being Venom, a lot of those memories are essentially going away. Now, we don't know if that's a byproduct of the Dreamstone or if that's a byproduct of just being away from the symbiote for that long. But if I recall, this is a new thing. This is not something that we've seen before. That like somebody becomes a host for the Venom symbiote and they're imbued with all these memories and experiences and everything, and they go through all these actions, and then once they lose it, they lose all the memories that go with it. The powers, of course, that's obvious, but in terms of the memories, I've never heard of that happening before. So it's kind of a cool little thing. But nonetheless, this is a pretty sweet little story. Of course, there's kind of a follow-up, a bit of a epilogue of sorts, but it's pretty awesome to see this whole thing unfold. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.